DawgNation welcomes Chris Doering of the SEC Network. Every year, Kirby gives us some sort of iconic mantra. This year's was assume nothing. When you think about the identity of this team, how does assume nothing resemble?
Well, as you were saying that, it kind of took me back to Florida when the Gators won 2006 National Championship, 08 National Championship under Urban Meyer. And Coach Meyer made the point at the time that a lot of the players on the team woke up on third base. Like they didn't do anything to deserve the credit or the success the program is having, but they just assumed that, hey, this is what we do at Georgia or at Florida. We show up, we're going to win. And I feel like that's kind of maybe been the case, or at least guarding against that happening in Athens. But, I have so much respect for Coach Smart and what he does in terms of getting his team ready, finding angles to motivate them. And I don't expect this to be one where they assume anything. It's particularly how that season ended, the disappointing finish in the SEC championship game against Alabama.
As a former quarterback, you bring a unique insight, and you know how important the relationship is between a quarterback and an offensive coordinator. And then you can almost group in Carson Beck and Mike Bobo together since they came in at the same time. This is year 2 for them.
Yeah.
How does the expectation for them change as a duo?
Well, I thought that the Georgia fans, a lot of the vocal fans, owed Mike Bobo an apology after the beginning of the season last year. It was disappointing to hear how negative they were about one of their own, a guy that had played there and had coached so successfully there under Mark Richt. Clearly, it frustrates me when fans question what is going on amongst the coaching staff when these guys spend so many more hours with these players. They understand, you didn't need to do a whole lot with Carson Beck early in the season. He's a first-year starter. Let's bring him along. Let's get the confidence level up. Let's hide some things and save some wrinkles for when we get a little more difficult portion of the schedule. And I thought that they brought him along perfectly. Now, the thing that I want to see this year is how do they, from the jump, obviously a much different opener than last season with Clemson being on the schedule, a tough, very talented defense that Dabo has. So I'm excited to see where they focused the attention on really expanding what Carson could do and what they worked on to try to take him to the next level, which I have him as my Heisman favorite. I know that's no surprise amongst most people. His odds are among the shortest out there, but really a big fan of what he did and what that offense did as a whole under Mike Bobo last year.
I'm glad you bring that up because I overheard you say that a few minutes ago about Carson Beck being your Heisman favorite. What is it about his game that allows him to be in that category for you, especially as a former quarterback?
Yeah, I think, I played receiver, so I look at it as from the wide receiver perspective. Like I've played with guys before where you have some players, some guys that think that you got a strong arm, you always got to zip it in there, But I think the way that he can change it up, the way that he can throw it in tight windows when he needs to, the way he can put a little air under it and drop it in. To me, that's the sign of a really good quarterback that has a feel for anticipating throws and putting it where they need to in accuracy.
You're a former Gator. The Dogs now also have a former Gator and Trevor Etienne. What sort of dynamic does he bring to this team that maybe UGA struggled with in the run game last year?
I tell you what, I talked to Coach Napier when we did the spring game back in April, and he was the one that they were really disappointed about losing. And obviously a very talented player. Florida had him when he was young, and he was highly productive. He gets some experience in the league now, and he goes to a place where, we had Todd Gurley on the show today, man. Playing running back at Georgia is something pretty special. Yeah. And so I think that Etienne is going to I've heard people say that he may be amongst the best players in the conference this year. I probably would not disagree with that. But I think this is a guy that has only scraped really the surface of what he's capable of. So they get a great player. It's a big addition by subtraction. You help your roster out and your biggest rival, you certainly take away one of their big-time players.
I feel like one thing that's kind of gotten, I guess you could say, lost in the sauce for Georgia this year is this idea of scheduling, because on everybody else's schedule, UGA is the toughest game. But then you take a look at Georgia's schedule. Yeah. They're on the road at Ole Miss, on the road at Alabama, and on the road at Texas. I feel like you look at that schedule, and it's a difficult one, but you're not saying that because it's Georgia.
Yeah, I think that was one of the crazy things as we were discussing pressure. I honestly believe that I think Ole Miss probably has the most pressure. Lane Kiffin has the most pressure on them given what they did last year and trying to back up to break through that next level. But I think Georgia and Kirby Smart has a ton of pressure on them, and it's self-inflicted pressure. When you have a lot of success, the expectation level goes up. But I do think that Georgia fans, after going, 41 years without a championship, they expect to win a national title every year. And I know the three-peat didn't work out last year, but there's no reason to believe that even despite the difficult nature of their schedule, that they're not the best team or going to be favored in every single game that they play in. So I do think it's a challenge, and I don't think people are giving Georgia the schedule the credit it deserves, the respect it deserves. But I think a lot of that, is more of a reflection of how we feel about Georgia and just how far and above better we think they are than just about everybody in the league.
So many storylines this year, whether it be Carson Beck, Trevor Etienne, Kirby Smart. What's the storyline you're going to be most closely following for the Dogs this season?
Ooh, man, that's a good question. I think for me, it's part of the thing I talked about with the pressure on Kirby Smart is how we look at him, how we view him. Last year in Atlanta, that Friday before the SEC title game on our show, I made the point. I said, Nick Saban's the greatest of all time, best to ever do it. But Kirby Smart is the best coach currently. And he went out there and lost the game the next day. Not that he did it, but the team lost the game. And so with no Nick Saban around anymore, he's the de facto, no doubt about it. There's nobody that's even a challenger. So, again, I think what ranks the pressure up a little bit is got to go to Tuscaloosa. You couldn't get over the hurdle consistently against Alabama. Now you got a new coach. You're expected to win when you play those guys. Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing is how does Kirby get his team ready to go despite the expectation and the pressure that he'll have on himself and the team has, and now being the greatest in this conference and the greatest nationwide, that's a lot to deal with every week.
Last thing, I cannot let you leave here without asking you a question about the Georgia-Florida game, but we're going to talk about the one in the future because in 2026 and 2027, the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium will be under renovations, and it presents the conversation of do they keep it at neutral site and possibly Tampa and Atlanta, or a home-and-home series? Which would you prefer?
So I'm much older than you, and you may not remember this happened back in the 90s when they were building the stadium for the Jags. So I'm one of the few guys that had a chance to play Georgia in Jacksonville, in Gainesville, and in Athens, and it was awesome to get a chance to have the Dogs come to the Swamp. It was so cool for me as a football historian in general to go between the hedges. But at the end of the day, something special about playing that game in Jacksonville. I hope the game remains there in the future. I do know for that 2-year period we'll have to figure out whether we go home and home or we do 2 neutral site games. I'd rather play that thing since we do have to go outside of Jacksonville. Let's do it home and home again. It was a great experience for me. I think it'll kind of be a 2-off, so to speak, and then let's get back to playing the game where it belongs in Jacksonville. Well,
we're always appreciative to have you here on DawgNation. Let DawgNation know where they can find you on social media.
Well, Twitter at Chris Doering and Instagram CDoering28. So I get PB always gets on me for not having the same consistency on my
I don't
social
either.
media handles. Yeah, so that's all right?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.